So let's begin. I've got quite a bit to try to cover in an hour. And so I want to jump in as quickly as we can. So just briefly introducing myself, my name's Jeff Tarrant. I'm a psychologist. I'm also board certified in neurofeedback, and I'm the director of the NeuroMeditation Institute. I'm located here in Eugene, Oregon. And really what a lot of our work is about is combining technology with meditation and really understanding that different styles of meditation do different things to the brain. And because of that, there's different implications. So that becomes important because of some of the work that I'm also doing with Helium, which is going to be a big part of our presentation today. So Helium is an augmented and virtual reality company that I've been working with for the last 3 years as the chief science officer. And what we've been doing is really integrating some of the methods and process of neuromeditation into virtual and augmented reality. So we'll talk about that in a few moments. Now, I realize that the people watching this now and the people that are going to tune in later have a very diverse background in terms of working with virtual and augmented reality. So because of that, I wanted to start briefly at the beginning and really break down what it is we're talking about for those of you that may be new to this or have minimal experience. So when we're talking about virtual reality, we're really talking about any kind of a system that you can see from this definition, an artificial environment which is experienced through sensory stimuli provided by a computer and in which one's actions partially determines what happens in the environment. Now that's an interesting definition. I pulled that off of the web, off of some, dictionary application. You can see from the picture that this young woman is wearing a piece of headgear. And this is typically how virtual reality is experienced. There are other ways to experience virtual reality, but this is the most common. And from that definition, you can see that it says it's powered by a computer. So some of the headgear that exists is literally plugged into a big computer. Others are kind of standalone devices where the computer is built into the headset. So because you're enclosed in the headgear, you do not see any of kind of what's happening out in the real world. And everything that you experience is kind of in this virtual world. So you're kind of transported somewhere else. So that's kind of what defines virtual reality. Sorry, get my slides. So here's somebody experiencing.
Oh my goodness, you guys have got to experience this. This is so fabulous.
This is one of our workshops, and you can see that from the outside it looks a little bit funny, right? Because we don't know what she's something very different than the people around her. The guy behind her just kind of looks like, what's going on here? So the type of headgear that we are using primarily right now is an Oculus Go headset, and that's what the woman in this video is wearing. We like the Oculus Go because it is self-contained. So there is no big computer. It's built in. And so that makes it portable. It's wireless. And also the price point is makes it pretty affordable. You can buy it at Best Buy or Walmart, get it on Amazon. And I think anymore they're about $150, something like that. So for virtual reality, that's pretty good. Now, augmented reality. Augmented reality is a little bit different because with augmented reality, you are still seeing the real world, but then you're adding a layer onto it. You're adding something to reality. So hence augmented. And so you can use this in a lot of different ways, but you have to be able to see what's going on in your environment in order for this to work. So there are different kinds of headgear that exist that allow you to do that, where you can see the world, but then there's something superimposed. The programs that we are developing right now are using mobile phones, because you can use the camera on the phone to see what's in front of you and then superimpose something on top of it. So on the image that is on this slide, you can see you can see the grass, and there's kind of a tree or something in the background. So somebody's holding the phone toward the ground, so you see what's in front of you, but then there's this solar system superimposed on top of it. So an example of augmented reality. Just an introduction to Helium. This is the company that I've been working with. And Helium is an augmented and virtual reality content company. So it doesn't make hardware. It doesn't make the headgear. It doesn't make any of the other things we're going to be talking about in terms of hardware. It's really a software company. So it's designing these experiences. And the idea is for the software to be able to be used with a variety of different hardware options. So not just the Oculus Go, that's kind of our primary headgear that we're using right now. But for instance, you can do this with the AR, you can do it on an iPhone, or you can do it on an Android phone. So over time, the idea is to incorporate more and more different types of systems so that people can access it regardless of what kind of hardware they're using. So the experiences that we have been creating are really story-based. We know that people remember stories much more easily, and it has more of an impact. And so trying to create stories that guide people toward a state of either relaxation or mindfulness or focus, depending on what we're trying to do. And so at this point, we've really been trying to create environments and stories that target stress, anxiety, and mood. Those have been our primary targets, especially stress and anxiety. A lot of the experiences are nature-based, and we're doing that intentionally because we know that when somebody sees nature, whether it's real or not, it quiets the nervous system. So simply being exposed to nature visually, again, even if it's in a headset, has a calming effect. So we want to take advantage of that and incorporate that. Same thing with the music and the sounds that we use. Those are very intentional to lead a person into this state. And then there's the guided neuromeditation aspects of this. So I briefly mentioned in the introduction that different styles of meditation do different things to the brain. So there's really 4 styles that we work with: focus, mindfulness, open heart, and quiet mind. And what we've done is we've started to incorporate these ideas into the Helium software so that there are specific experiences designed to help you get into these different states of consciousness. Here is this is just a little short video showing you some of the experiences. This is obviously virtual reality. This is showing you some of the biofeedback input. It's a zoom in that we'll talk about that later. Here's augmented reality, where you're seeing butterflies zooming around a room, superimposed. Another augmented reality with that solar system. You see the solar system superimposed on a couch in a living room. And then back to virtual reality.
Take a moment to feel free.
Waterfall experience. But it's just a little distorted because we're taking a highly image and superimposing it on 2D. So it looks a little funny. So that's just a quick example of what some of the experiences look like, so you can kind of get a sense of that. Obviously, it's very different if you've got the headgear on as opposed to seeing it on a computer screen, but you get an idea. So one of the things that is very important with virtual reality, and one of the reasons that it seems to be a powerful tool for a variety of mental health concerns is because of this idea of presence. And so this term is used in virtual reality to talk about the subjective feeling of being in another place. And this is, again, this is a very important element of how virtual reality works, or the power of it, because the brain believes what it sees. So even though you can be in a virtual reality environment and part of your brain knows this isn't real, this is computer generated, or it's 360-degree cameras that took a picture of something and I'm seeing that now. But part of your brain doesn't really care. It just believes what it sees. This is why I also have some concerns around some of the ways that virtual reality is used with things like horror movies or first-person shooter games. Again, your nervous system doesn't fully understand that this isn't real. And so kind of thinking about how intense that could be for somebody to experience. So we want to use this for good. We want to use this power of the mind believing what it sees. We want to use it for good to try to help people shift into a more balanced state. This idea of presence is actually critical for some of the ways that VR has been used for mental health, especially exposure-based therapies like treatment for phobias. Now, that's not something we're doing, but there's actually a lot of research literature showing how powerful virtual reality can be. And it makes sense because the traditional approach to working with phobias is to gradually expose somebody to the thing that they are concerned about or frightened of. And you, in the traditional sense, you would start with sort of imagining these things. And that's great, that works. But how much more powerful if you could actually put somebody in those situations. So imagine if somebody has a fear of heights and you could put them in a virtual reality experience where you have a graduated series of experiences where you're going higher and higher, maybe eventually end up in a hot air balloon. Again, what a great way to deal with that. This idea of presence also works really well for pain, really because it's a distraction technique. Again, the brain believes what it sees, and so when you put somebody in virtual reality, it can be an escape. It can be something that totally takes you out of your current situation. So there's also a lot of research being done with pain management in hospital settings. So, and we've also seen in some research that they've actually started to study this to show that virtual reality can provide more presence than two-dimensional scenes, which is kind of obvious. But it's good to have some research to back that up. So when I first started working with Helium, it was only 3 years ago, but things move fast, and we really didn't know much about how virtual reality works, what its impact was. Because of my background working with the brain, working with brain imaging, that's kind of where I first got involved, was looking at some of these experiences and trying to understand what the impact is. And so the very first thing that we did was a simple case study with a mindfulness experience in virtual reality. And so we hooked somebody up so we could measure their brainwave activity. And this was somebody who was more of an anxious person, and put them through a 4 or 5 minute virtual reality experience of mindfulness in nature, and then measured their brainwave activity afterward. And so these are just snapshot images that you see on the screen. So that's, obviously it's a bit sort of exaggerated from the full data set that we had, but you can see that there was a pretty dramatic downshifting. This was measuring fast brainwave activity, so high beta, which is often associated with anxiety. And so we saw that, at least for this person in this case study, that they were able to shift their brain state pretty quickly, 4 or 5 minutes. And so that really is kind of what got me really engaged with this process and trying to understand, okay, looks like there's something to this. We need to study it more. So the next thing we did was do a full-blown study to sort of examine this further. And what we did was uh, recruited a group of subjects who uh, essentially qualified for a diagnosis of generalized anxiety. And so again, the people that were in the study already had some history of anxiety, some concerns with anxiety. And we brought them in, and we basically had two groups. One was a control group, and one was the virtual reality group. And we gave them some measures, some anxiety measures to fill out, some questionnaires, and also measure their brainwave activity. And what we did first was get a baseline. Then we just had them rest, just sit and do nothing with their eyes closed for 5 minutes. Because we really wanted to see, well, how do we know that virtual reality does anything more than just taking a break? We don't really know. So we had them do that first. And then after that, had them do the virtual reality. And this is a piece of that data. This was just the virtual reality group. This data doesn't include the control group. And looking at their state anxiety scores. We didn't measure trait anxiety because obviously that doesn't make sense in this kind of a quick study. And what you can see is that there was actually a significant drop of anxiety, a 16% drop, just by resting, just not doing anything for a few minutes, actually did have a nice effect. But then you can see the third bar, and sorry they're not labeled. The labeling on the bottom is kind of gray scaled out. But the third bar was their anxiety rating after doing the virtual reality experience. And so you can see that there was an additional drop after the rest period that was also statistically significant. So from the first measurement to the virtual reality, there was actually a 33% drop in their anxiety scores, which was statistically significant. Now, what was interesting, I don't have it on this chart, but the control group, what they did was took a 4 or 5 minute rest period, followed by another 4 or 5 minute rest period, no virtual reality. And actually, they showed similar but not quite as dramatic of a change. So even though this was very positive and looked great, actually the control group also showed a drop of anxiety, and then after the second rest period, it was a little bit more decreased, but not as dramatic as this. So that was kind of confusing. It's like, well, what's going on here? What was interesting, though, is when we looked at the brainwave activity, this is where things got really interesting. And we were especially interested in a part of the brain called the anterior cingulate. And the anterior cingulate runs right down the midline. It's a little bit deeper down, and it's kind of, in the forehead and a little bit further up, but deeper down. And the anterior cingulate is very much involved in holding attention on something. And for that reason, it's very much involved in anxiety, because with anxiety, we're often holding attention on certain thoughts, certain emotions, certain behaviors. And so we wanted to measure the activation of that anterior cingulate to see what happened with that. And so here you can see changes of beta activity. Beta is a fast brain wave. And again, this is the virtual reality group. So after doing the rest period, it actually increased. So even though they reported feeling more relaxed, less anxious, the beta in the ACC actually increased. Don't know what that means exactly, except for perhaps, if you give somebody 5 minutes to sit quietly, they're going to be thinking about stuff. So perhaps that activation was what was going on here. What was really interesting was that after the virtual reality, there was a significant decrease of beta activity in the anterior cingulate. So again, this kind of matches that anxiety reduction element. Now, what's really important is that when you looked at the control group, they did not show this pattern. So again, even though they reported feeling more relaxed, less anxious, they did not show these kind of changes in their anterior cingulate. So this really, to us, suggested that there is something special about virtual reality. It does have a different impact than just resting or just, kind of, sort of a typical way to reduce your stress. the next step that we wanted to do was look and see, well, what happens in sort of a real life situation? Because, obviously recruiting people, bringing them into your office for a research study, that's great for controlling things, but it's not so great in terms of like, well, what happens in the real world? So the next study we did was just a very simple uh, study, but at a Red Cross blood drive. So we kind of assumed that people get a little bit anxious before getting stuck with a needle. Actually, we don't have to assume that. We know that. There's a lot of research showing that, you know, um, needles are difficult for a lot of people. And so we simply had people fill out a Brunel mood scale before, um, and then do another 4 or 5 minute short mindfulness experience in virtual reality, and then looked at their mood response afterward. And again, this was just before getting stuck with a needle. And here's what we found. And there's a lot going on this chart, but basically you can see the trends pretty easily, which is that the sort of quote unquote negative mood states all decreased pretty significantly, especially things like tension, fatigue, anger. And then the more positive emotional states or mood states, happiness and calmness, increased significantly. Now, what really struck us was we divided the groups by age brackets. And one of the things that was really interesting is that the 15 to 19 year old group actually showed the biggest changes. We don't exactly know why that was. But again, it suggests that this could be a really positive intervention for teenagers. That's not a population we've studied a lot yet, but this, sort of bodes well for thinking about how we might use it with a younger population. Okay, so that everything we've talked about so far is really using virtual and augmented reality just by themselves without any kind of biofeedback input. But of course, that's really kind of a lot about what this little webinar is about, is talking about some of the ways that we've tried to kind of advance that work a little bit. So we know that VR and AR can work by itself. That's pretty well established. And so, could we add some power to that, some power steering, really? And so right now we have two options of using biofeedback. By the way, let me just define biofeedback for those of you that may not be familiar. Biofeedback is really any kind of a system where you're measuring some aspect of your physiology. Could be heart rate, could be skin conductance, could be your breath, could be your brain waves. So you're measuring something about your physiology and then getting information about that. So biofeedback is a powerful tool to learn self-regulation skills, to get information about yourself. And so what we've been doing is integrating different biofeedback tools into the Helium experiences. So right now we have two options. One is using the Muse 1 headband. And the Muse 1 part is important because they have several different pieces of hardware out there right now. And unfortunately, we only have access to the SDK kit for the Muse 1. So that's what we're using. So it's a simple headband that's got 4 EEG sensors into it, 2 in the front and 2 in the temporal lobes. And essentially what we're doing is gathering brainwave data and then communicating that brainwave data with our software such that your brainwaves can control the experience in different ways. And we'll talk more about how that might look in just a moment. And we have a couple of different algorithms for how to use those brainwaves, so it's not just one thing. The other piece of hardware that we're using right now is an Apple Watch, because you can monitor your heart rate through the Apple Watch. And so again, we can use this with Bluetooth communication to talk to the VR, actually not VR, we're using this with AR right now. And so you can monitor your heart rate and teach yourself to reduce your heart rate. So you probably saw in one of the early slides that, Helium is really hardware agnostic, meaning that not just things like phones and headgear, but even these wearables, these biometric inputs, things that you can put on your body that have a Bluetooth communication and measure some aspect of physiology. There's a lot of them on the market right now. And our goal is ultimately to keep adding different options so that, people who already have a piece of wearable hardware, that they might be able to integrate it and use it with our software. So here's kind of what we're up to so far with this. And I'm going to show you an example of how this looks in augmented reality in just a second. So right now, we can measure brainwave patterns associated with quiet mind. So we can measure when the mind is more relaxed, more quiet with brainwaves. And we have another algorithm that's called open heart. And this is really connecting to feelings of positivity. It's another thing that has been well researched, is the power distribution in the frontal lobes. So if there's more power on the left, that's associated with more of a positive state, feelings of positivity or approach, motivation, moving towards something. Whereas if the energy is on the right side, that tends to be a little bit more negative, a little bit more pessimistic, a little bit of more of a withdrawal motivation. So in VR or AR, using the headband, you can choose which of those protocols you want to use. We also have a focus protocol that's coming out very soon, maybe even this month. And then with the Apple Watch, obviously you can work on your heart rate. We're also hoping to work on that algorithm to do heart rate variability in the near future. So I'm going to play this little recording here. So this is what it looks like on your phone. So at the beginning, you've got kind of this background. You select which wearable you're using. In this case, we're using a watch. So they selected the watch. You open the app on your phone. Tells you what to do here. You hit the play button. You can see at the bottom it says connecting. So that's the Bluetooth connecting the watch to the phone. There you go, it's connected. Then you pick which experience you want. Right now there's 2 experiences. There's more coming. In fact, we hope to have another one of these very soon as well. This is the butterfly experience. And so you pick a surface and plant a tree. So there's the augmented reality.
Open your eyes and meditate.
You can hear the woman's voice.
Take 3 relaxing breaths.
So the woman's voice is kind of guiding you through a basic relaxation exercise. You see the settings there. You can go in and make the challenge.
It takes about 2 weeks for a caterpillar to transform from a chrysalis into a butterfly.
We call it a firefly.
Changing human life can take a lot longer than that. Your metamorphosis begins now.
That's your heart rate. So this is the biofeedback element, is you can monitor your heart rate, see what it's doing, how it's shifting. That white solid line is the threshold. And that's what the person was just adjusting on that setting screen a few moments ago. You can make that easier or harder. The program automatically takes a baseline of your heart rate at the beginning and sets the threshold pretty much where you're beginning with the heart rate. So you want to lower it. You want to keep it below the line. As you keep your heart rate below the line, over time, you start to hatch butterflies out of this chrysalis. Is it a chrysalis or a cocoon? I don't know. At any rate, if you keep watching that firefly down there, because if you go above the line and you stay above the line for a few seconds, then the butterflies stop hatching for a moment and the woman's voice kicks back in to kind of help coach you back.
Transformation takes time.
That's what
Relax.
just happened right there.
Recall a time when you
the voice
felt
kicking
love,
back in.
joy, or appreciation. Use that positive feeling to grow your butterfly.
He's trying to help you get back into your relaxed state to lower your heart rate. Now you see there's sort of a butterfly counter at the top of the screen. So as you progress in here, you keep hatching more butterflies. And because it's augmented reality, you can actually kind of scan around the room. You can move the phone around the room to kind of follow the butterflies.
Transformation takes
See what
time.
just happened. They made it way harder.
Relax.
Look at the bottom of the screen.
Recall a time when you
heart rate
felt
is way
love,
above the line.
joy, or
So you're
appreciation.
prompted again.
Use that positive feeling to grow your butterfly.
Use biofeedback tool. Actually, clinically, in my work with clients, I've actually found this to be super useful because so many people already have an Android or an iPhone, and the app is actually only $5. And so anybody who's already got an Apple Watch, they've got a biofeedback tool right there in their hand. So we can work on some of the skills in the office, and then they can take it home to keep practicing. Okay, you get the idea. So, so we've got this integration, but of course we needed to study that to see, well, how is this working? What's going on here? So the first study we did was actually with virtual reality, and it was just a proof of concept study. I say just because, we only had 4 subjects for this. We really just wanted to see, is this doing what we think it's doing? That's kind of an important place to start. And so we actually did this with a group of firefighters. And we chose firefighters because, sort of a high stress occupation. Wanted to see, how are they able to work with this? Now you can see the picture of the guy there. This is one of our subjects, one of the firefighters. And he's got a red cap on so we can monitor his brainwave activity in 19 locations. And you can see at this point, we were working with a different VR headset called Gear VR, and you had to actually plug your phone in. So the phone served as the computer. Now with Oculus Go, that is already baked in. The computer's already baked in, so you don't have to use your phone. And then there's just kind of a screenshot on the side of the beginning of setting it up in virtual reality. So what we wanted to do with this study was to ask these firefighters to use the virtual reality with the Muse headband, with our open heart protocol. So to engage in feelings of positivity. And as they engage in feelings of positivity, the blue line would go above the red line. So that was our old graphics. You can kind of see them on the screen there, the blue line and the red line. The red line is the threshold, and the blue line represents the brainwave activity. In this case, it's the ratio of activation on the left side compared to activation on the right side. And remember, we want it on the left. So we gave this to these firefighters and said, hey, give it a shot. See if you can follow the guidance and keep the blue line above the red line. This was what they were seeing. So they were in the waterfall experience where you float up a waterfall, you kind of go through the clouds, and then you come out above the clouds on the other side. So this was the experience they were using, but it was also guided by their brainwave activity. So if their asymmetry shifted to the right, which in this case was the wrong direction, the line would go below the threshold, the scene would stop, it would pause, it would kind of have a red hue to it, and they would get coached back. So again, it was a 5-minute experience. And so on this simplified chart, what you can see are each of the 4 subjects numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, and 3 of the things we were measuring. One of the things we were looking at was that gamma asymmetry, so that power measurement in the front. If there was a positive change, meaning that it shifted to the left, then it'll be a positive value. And then the other things we looked at were some mood scales. So cheerfulness and a scale called ill-humored, sort of a negative mood state. And so what you see when you glance at this is that 3 of the 4 subjects increased their activation in the brain over to the left side. So that's the blue bar. And you can see it's got a positive value in 3 of the 4. So the first one, it increased by 6%. The second one by about 9%. Subject 4 actually increased theirs by 133%, which crazy. We had to kind of change the scale on this chart to make it fit, but just a ridiculous increase. Now, interestingly, subject 3 actually showed a decrease, meaning their brainwave activity shifted to the right, which was not really where we wanted it. So that's one piece of information here that we'll come back to. If you look at the orange and the green bars, those represent the cheerfulness and the ill-humored. And so for us, what was really important is that in general, if that gamma asymmetry shifted to the left, they reported more positive feelings and less negative feelings. So for example, look at subject 2, where they had a 15% increase in their cheerfulness report and a 15% decrease in ill-humored. And same thing with subject 4, 15% increase of cheerfulness, 20% decrease of ill-humor. But then look at subject 3. So they shifted to the right, and in fact, they reported a decrease in cheerfulness. So even though we would have loved for subject 3 to have had a positive response, this was actually very useful because what it showed us was that it looks like what we're doing here connects. It makes sense, meaning that if you're able to use the biofeedback appropriately, you're probably going to feel better. Now, what happened to subject 3? Good question. We don't really know. But some of the things that we've thought about is that when we went back and looked at some of the subject data, subject 3 was the only one of the group who reported a history with some mental health concerns, specifically depression and some anxiety. And so did that influence their ability to sort of respond to this? Don't know for sure. There could be lots of different reasons. We also noted that this was the only one of the group who really struggled with the exercise, meaning that it was probably set a little bit too difficult for them. Again, you can adjust the difficulty, but they dropped below the threshold multiple times in the exercise, and so it would pause repeatedly. So perhaps it was a little bit too challenging for them. At any rate, for us, kind of the conclusions were still positive because, really it was a very short intervention, 4 to 5 minutes. We gave the subjects almost no instructions at all. Literally what I described before was kind of what we told them. Put this thing on your head, see if you can keep the blue line above the red line, and that was about it. And we saw that 3 of the 4 subjects did show a positive change in their gamma asymmetry. 3 of the 4 subjects indicated significant increases in cheerfulness. 2 of the 4 showed strong decreases in ill-humored. And there was a clear connection between the gamma changes and their mood changes. So again, for us, this was actually very useful because it kind of showed that what we think we're measuring does seem to be accurate. So that's super helpful. Now, what we've done obviously is because, you need to have a study with more than 4 subjects. Oh yeah, hang on, before I get to that, one of the things that we've also done, thinking about subject 3 in particular, right? We know that most people aren't just using this as a one-shot thing, even though that's the way we've done the research. As they come in, we do one experience and that's it. We know that most people who are using this are using it on a continual basis, daily, sometimes multiple times a day. And so one of the things that we've done is actually created a video curriculum that goes along with the software. so that people can go in and learn more about how to use this. And actually, there's even a 4-week open heart course, so that if people really wanted to kind of do a self-paced learning about how this works, how the brain works, how positivity works, how to use helium to advance their skills, they've got sort of a way to do that. They also get a copy of my book as well, which kind of does the same thing. Gives them some background information, some information about how the brain works, brain science, connecting to open heart things. So, what we're trying to do is support the process, because we recognize that not everybody can just jump in and just do it. They need a little bit of support. Okay, here's where I was going, was that we saw in that case study that there was 4 people, seemed to work pretty well for 3 of them, but we need more subjects. We need a bigger study. So the study that we're just finishing right now, actually we've collected all the data, we've done all the analyses, we're just in the process of writing it up for publication. But we did it with augmented reality. And so this was the butterfly experience. And one of the things that I really like about this study that we did was, for our control group, they did the augmented reality experience, the butterfly experience, just without the brain waves. So actually, in some ways, they're both active groups. One of them just did the AR experience, just watching it and just listening to the guided meditation and following along. The other group did the same thing, but their brain waves were controlling it. And this was the positivity experience that we were doing. Again, just like the previous study that we talked about, all of the subjects were screened so that they either had a moderate level of anxiety or depression or both. People were randomly assigned to one of the 2 groups, and they were also blinded to which condition they were in. In fact, our subjects didn't know, they didn't know what the other groups were getting. All they knew was that we were comparing a couple of different application-based meditation experiences. So again, I like that about the study design, because for all they knew, what they had was what we were interested in measuring. So we did measure their brainwave activity as well as the Brunel mood scale. There were some other things that we looked at as well, but it's a little bit beyond the scope of what we can get into today. Hopefully it'll be published in a few months and you can read it and read it in the article. So this is the app that we were using. We've already kind of looked at this, using the butterfly experience with the phone. And here's the Brunel mood scale changes that we got. So you can see the control and the active group. And so this is very interesting. It's interesting to me anyway, that both groups showed very similar responses, and all positive, really. So you see, look how much anger decreased, and tension, depression, confusion, all of those decreased pretty dramatically for both groups. And at the same time, happiness and calmness both increased. Now, but there wasn't a big difference between the 2 groups. They were pretty similar. Now, in some cases, the active group did a little bit better, but really it's not significant. So kind of curious. It's a little bit like that virtual reality study that we did, where both groups seem to feel better. But of course, the brain may not be the exact same. So I want to look at that as well. So here's one of our early analyses, and looking at the treatment effects in the different brainwave bands. So you can see on the side, it's got theta, alpha 1, alpha 2, beta. These are different brainwave speeds, starting from the slowest at theta, going up to gamma. And the further away you are from 0 on that effect side of the scale, the more significant the impact was. And so you can see that the active group had a much stronger effect on pretty much all of the brainwaves. High beta, beta, alpha 2, alpha 1, beta, all of them were way higher than the passive group. So very interesting. So again, we're seeing that there's a stronger brainwave pattern if you're using your brainwaves to control the experience rather than just following along. It's also interesting that the alpha 1 is so strong because that's a pattern that's associated with more of a quiet mind meditative state, is an increase of alpha 1. So that's kind of interesting. We're still in the process of interpreting this, trying to understand what it means. In fact, another element of this that we discovered is that the active group, the group with the brainwave biofeedback, also had the most variability in their brainwave response. So again, we don't know exactly what that means at this point. We're still trying to understand that, but it's kind of exciting. Now, this was probably the simplest part of the study and maybe one of the most interesting. At the end of the study, when they'd done everything, filled out all the questionnaires, we had one last set of questionnaires that basically asked them some simple questions about their experience. So one of the questions was asking them how engaged they were with the meditation. And what you can see here is that, oh, I apologize, they're not labeled. The labels got lost on the black screen. But the control group, the group that did the AR experience without the biometrics, 24% that they were, engaged a great deal in the meditation. Whereas the active group, 62% said they were. Again, it kind of makes sense. If you feel like you have some control over what's happening, it makes sense that you're going to be more engaged. Similarly, when we ask them, do you think this type of meditation could be helpful to manage stress or anxiety in the future? 86% of the folks that used it with brainwave input said yes, whereas only 19% of the other group did. So what does all this mean? Well, again, we're still interpreting some of this, but some of the conclusions so far is that both experiences were equally effective in decreasing negative moods and increasing positive moods. So that right there is kind of a win. We got that. It also looks like the having the biofeedback input impacted the brain more than not having it. Again, kind of makes sense. Still need to understand that. And then finally, having that EEG biofeedback input was related to increased engagement and motivation. And for me, that may be the most important thing, because even if both of the experiences work, the more motivated and engaged you are, the more likely you are to use it in the future. And again, since I'm a psychologist, I work with folks who are trying to manage their stress and anxiety. And so if they have a tool that they're actually going to use, that's valuable. So for me, that little piece of data at the end may actually be the most interesting, not from a publication perspective, but from a clinical perspective. So you see on this little image on the side, this is an experience. It's not available at the moment. Hopefully it will be soon. But you fill up a wand with your feelings of positivity or quiet mind or relaxation, and then you can cast a spirit animal, into the environment. So you see this fox. It's a little blue spirit fox running around. Really, this slide, I just wanted to point out that we're also finding that these experiences are pretty helpful for other things besides stress and anxiety and mood, even though that's what we've been focused on. And so, just a couple of pieces of feedback that we've received recently. You see the first one. I today just let 2 of my patients try out my Oculus Go with Helium and Muse. One of them liked it a lot and wants to continue as a means to help her manage migraine symptoms. So, when I hear things like that, that's super helpful, because I actually would have never thought about using this for migraines. It just wouldn't. And so, the fact that some people are finding this useful in that way is great. The second one is from a chronic pain patient that they've been using Helium, and they have found that they've been able to reduce their blood pressure and their pulse by about 20%, pretty significant. And then the last one was somebody that recently just sent this to us, that her daughter was in a car accident and was having a panic attack afterward, and used Helium to kind of get herself back and get herself grounded and stabilized. So it looks like there's actually a lot of possible applications for this. And so we've got a lot of research homework to do. We want to look at sleep. We want to look at pain. There's a lot of things that we want to engage with. Starting with stress and anxiety makes the most sense for us because we know that, 60 to 80% of all concerns have an element of stress and anxiety in them, whether it's mental health or physical health. The other thing that I'm excited about are some of the development aspects of where we're going. Obviously, we've mentioned new inputs. So being able to use other watches for inputs, such as the Android watch, that would be great. Other EEG headbands, but also other types of biofeedback. We're very much interested in pulling in breath, respiration, skin conductance, heart rate variability, having the gaze or control directed. We're going to be interfacing with clinical neurofeedback systems so that they could use Helium with neurofeedback. We already mentioned the focus protocol. There'll be a data dashboard built out so that you'll be able to access exactly what's happening with the biometrics. And then having a little bit more user controls in the software so that you can control if you want guided feedback or guided instructions or not, the type of music, things like that. So those are all things coming down the pipeline here. This is that gaze-directed experience I was just kind of talking about that the Mayo Clinic is using. These are snippets of it.
To change these
so it's actually 10
imaginary
minutes long. It's a
by
longer
simply looking at
experience.
different areas
And
of this
you go through
screen.
the 4 seasons.
Start
and
by looking here.
Direct your attention towards specific things, and it's gaze directed. And when you hold your focus there, something happens, right? You can see in this example, I think on the next one, it's directing you to a tree or something, or maybe it's the snowballs. I don't know. We're in winter. At any rate, the idea with this is that we want something that's interesting, that changes, that people have some control over, but also that's not too stimulating. Because again, we want people to be in kind of a relaxed state. So, okay, here you go. Yeah. So you focus on the tree. And I think we're going to be taking out some of the elements telling you what's going to happen. So that's a little bit more of a mystery. Uh-oh, they changed their direction. There we go. All right. This is our team. So even though I'm the one doing the webinar, I'm a small piece of this work. Sarah Hill is the CEO, chief storyteller, really amazing. She's just done an amazing job with all of this. Her history as a journalist. Ricky Rockley's our lead developer. And you can see all of the other folks who are really central to making this all happen. So anyway, I just wanted to give a shout out to them. So not to pretend like somehow this is all me. I'm just a small piece. So if this is something that you're wanting to check out, there's different ways you can do it, obviously. With virtual reality, go get a headset. The Helium subscription is $29 a month. There's 20 experiences in there right now. And then a new one comes out every couple months. Obviously, you can get an optional Muse 1 headband to use as EEG input. The AR app, this is sort of low-hanging fruit. You can find it in your app store on your phone. It's $5. And then you can use it with either the Apple Watch or the EEG headband, or just as a standalone experience. If you're interested in more, there's other ways, obviously, that you can kind of figure some of this stuff out. Check out the website, NeuroMeditationInstitute.com. We've got all kinds of courses and workshops and whatnot. So, of course, I ran almost all the way up to the hour. But if anybody has any questions, and you type them in the little chat there, I'll do my best to answer them. Have I done any research specifically on the audio side of these experiences and impact on stress and anxiety, music tones, 3D audio, interactive? The short story is no. That's definitely something that we want to look at. It's interesting because this field is so young that we kind of had to start from the basics, like, is there something happening here at all? And now that we are pretty convinced that yes, there is, starting to get into those details. What about specific kinds of music? People ask all the time about, what about binaural beats or isochronic tones, things like that. that's something that's on our list of things to explore, to add that in, and what the what that adds or doesn't add. So it's a great question. We just haven't got there yet. No other questions. That's how clear this all was. I thank you all for being here. Like I said at the beginning, I'm happy to send out sort of a PDF of these slides so you can check them out at your own time. There'll also be a link available so that you could watch this at a later time or share it with somebody. Anyway, thanks so much. And if you need anything or have questions, shoot me an email. All right, thank you. Have a good day.